Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and I've got a great lesson ready for y'all today. So we're kind of switching up the units. Today we're talking about something known as the cell cycle, okay? So thanks for making it. We'll go ahead and hop into it. I'm excited about covering this new material with everybody today. So, first of all, what is the cell cycle? Well, you can see here, this is a definition. The cell cycle is the continuous cycle of cell growth and division that persists throughout an organism's life. I want to direct your attention to that picture over there on the side. A couple things to note about this. Well, this is the cell cycle. What I really wanted us to recognize here is that it's a circle, right? And so this cycle never really ends. When you're done with one part of the cell cycle, you just go right into the next part. And when you're done with it, you just start the whole thing back over again. So that's why it's called the cell cycle. A couple of words I want to direct your attention to. Let's look at the words on the outside here. So you'll see that the longest part of this cell cycle is a part called the interphase. You can see all three green parts of this circle here are labeled as the interphase. So the interphase is the longest part of the cell cycle. Then when we're getting ready to actually divide the cell, we'll move into a different part of the cell cycle called mitosis, and we'll get into more detail about what that is later on. And then the last part of the cell cycle is the cytokinesis. So I'm using the words start and stop, but because this is a cycle, there's really no true ending or beginning place. It's a cycle, so you can really start it up anywhere. Okay, so the cell cycle, this is how cells live their life basically, and it's how they divide and make more cells. So why is this important to us? Why do we care about the cell cycle? Well, this is the process of cell division that involves the reproduction of cells, which is essential for growth, tissue repair, and development. So let's take a second and think about what this is really saying. So when you were first made in your mother's womb, when the sperm and the egg of your parents came together to form you, that one-celled organism is called a zygote, okay? We all started off as a single cell. Well, as you live your life and your cells divide and divide and divide and undergo this cell cycle, today, you're probably made up of trillions of cells, okay? So we had to make a lot of cells to get you to where you are today. So that's why the cell cycle is so important, because we started off as one cell, and now we're trillions of cells large, okay? This is also really important for tissue repair, okay? Imagine you're like riding your bicycle down the road and you fall off and you get some road rash, maybe you scrape up part of your skin. Well, that damaged tissue has to be replaced by healthy living tissues, and part of that process would be making new cells. So we use the cell cycle to repair tissue damage, as well as development. So as you grow through your life, like I was kind of talking about, you start off as a single cell, now you're trillions of cells large. That all started off as one cell, and it just kept dividing. One cell divides into two cells divide into four cells divide into 8, until we get to trillions of cells that make up our body today. So that's what we're going to be kind of talking about. How does the cell live its life? How does it replicate? How does it make new copies of itself in case you need extra cells? Okay? So let's go ahead and talk about a couple of main reasons why cells would be dividing in the first place. So the first thing is, like I was just talking about, that growth and repair of your body. Okay, cell division enables organisms to grow and replace damaged or dead cells. This maintains overall tissue function and health, okay? Another reason why the cell division is so important is that it makes managing our resources a lot easier. Cells can really only get to a certain size. Once they're too large, they really can't do their job very effectively. So cells can't get very large, they have to stay really, really small. So dividing these cells helps to ensure that substances such as food, water, and waste are efficiently managed within the body, as smaller cells are more effectively exchange the materials with their environment. It's kind of a long story, but as a cell, or really anything, gets larger, the area of the cell or whatever object you're talking about is going to increase a lot faster than the perimeter. And y'all might remember from our last unit when we're talking about cellular transport, that cell membrane plays a really, really important part of maintaining homeostasis, what can come in and out of the cell. So basically, cells have to stay small. They have to be really, really small in order to do their job. If they get too big, they're not able to do that job. So that's why our cells are made up of trillions of very, very tiny cells and not just 5 or 10 really big cells. That just wouldn't work. Okay, so these are two main reasons why our cells are dividing in the first place. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the cell cycle. Again, this is just the introduction today, so I'm just going to introduce you to some words and some vocabulary, and as the unit progresses, we'll take a deeper dive into all of these different parts of the cell cycle and what they mean. Okay, so the cell cycle consists of 3 main stages. It's the interphase, mitosis, and then cytokinesis. You'll notice that, look at that picture on the left, the 3 green parts of the circle, that's all part of interphase. Okay, and so interphase is the longest part of the cell cycle. After interphase, we'll go into something known as mitosis. Mitosis is basically dividing the nucleus apart, and then cytokinesis is dividing the cytoplasm apart. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the green area of this circle. That's all interphase. So interphase is really long. It gets subdivided into 3 smaller sections. So you can see here that the 3 parts that make up interphase are called G1. The G here stands for growth. So the G1 phase is the first growth phase. And then there in the middle is the S phase. S stands for synthesis. If you synthesize something, that means you're making something. Here, we're making new DNA, okay? And we'll talk about why that's so important later on. And then finally, the last part of interphase is called G2 phase. And just like in G1, G and G2 just stands for growth. So it's growing again. And we'll talk about how they're different here in a later lesson, okay? So after interphase, we move into a part called mitosis. Mitosis is divided into several different phases as well. Okay, so mitosis has 4 parts. This is a very intricate procedure. We're dividing the nucleus apart, and what that means is we have to make sure that each new cell that we're making gets an exact copy of the right DNA. There's a lot going on here, so we divide it into 4 smaller sections. So mitosis is divided into prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. And what I want you to remember here is just this little acronym called PMAT. P-M-A-T. If you can remember PMAT, you'll be able to remember the 4 phases of mitosis, okay? And then after mitosis, or really in conjunction almost towards the end of mitosis, the last part of the cell cycle will start up, and that's called cytokinesis. In the picture here, you can see how that little blue triangle part kind of overlaps with the mitosis part a little bit. That's because before mitosis is totally done, cytokinesis will begin, and we'll talk about this in more detail. What you really want to know today is that cytokinesis is just dividing the cytoplasm, okay, and we'll get into more detail here in just a little bit. So we've talked about it a little bit. What I wanted to do now is, teacher, if you could go ahead and pass out that worksheet to everybody. We're going to go over this together and kind of label some parts, and that's going to help this kind of stick in your memory a little bit. So why don't you go ahead and pause the video, pass that worksheet out for today, and then we'll cover it here in just a second. So go ahead and pause the video whenever everybody's ready. Come back to me, and I'll go over that worksheet with y'all here in just a moment, okay? All right, great. So we have a blank cell cycle sheet here. What I want to do is just go ahead and label this together. There are some directions on this page about how to color. I'll go over and label it with y'all, and then y'all can take some time and color it in when we're done, okay? So again, this is the cell cycle. There's a lot of different phases here, and we want to know what those different phases are today, and then as the lesson goes on, we'll learn what is happening in each of the different phases as we go. Okay, so to get started with, what I want to label here is the longest part of the cell cycle. Okay, so what I want to do, go ahead and take something to write with, and we're going to label these 3 parts as interphase. Okay? Remember, interphase is the longest part of the cell cycle. What's happening in interphase is the cell is really just living its normal life, and it's growing a little bit. Okay, there's no division going on here. Okay, so all 3 of these would be known as interphase. And as you can see, in this circle, there are 3 parts of interphase, okay? And I mentioned them earlier, but let's go ahead and label them here so that you can have something to study in case you need to look over this on your own time. So interphase has 3 parts, okay? The first part of interphase is called G1. So we're going to label this as G1. You might remember that G just stands for growth. The cell is getting larger here, okay? The next part of interphase is called the S phase. And S stands for synthesis, okay? So the cell is synthesizing, specifically synthesizing new DNA, so that when we divide, each cell is going to get a copy of it. After the S phase, we have the G2 phase. We'll talk about this in more detail later on. What's really happening here in the G2 phase is the cell is getting ready to divide. Great. All right, so here's what I want to label next. We have one little arrow left on the outside, okay? This is known as the M phase, okay? And the M phase is just 2 phases that we kind of talked about put together. So the M phase is made up of mitosis, which I'll write here. Mitosis. And the other part of the M phase is that cytokinesis that I mentioned earlier. Cytokinesis. Great. Okay, so really all we have left to do here is to label the 4 different parts of mitosis. Okay, there's 4 smaller phases of mitosis, and I gave y'all a little acronym that might help make it easier to remember these. So try to remember PMAT here, okay, PMAT. What does PMAT stand for? Well, those are the 4 parts of mitosis. So I'll go ahead and write that here first, PMAT, okay? And what do those letters stand for? Well, they stand for the different phases. So it's prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and then telo or telophase. Okay, great. So I really just wanted to introduce the cell cycle today, kind of get familiar with some of these different parts and some of the different names of the cycles. As the unit progresses, we'll kind of get into the nitty-gritty and talk about what's happening in detail a little bit. Okay, so why don't you all go ahead, follow the directions on this sheet, kind of color it in. Just putting pencil to paper like that will kind of help you remember these different parts of it, okay? So thank you all so much for following along. Your teacher has some other assignments, so make sure to give it your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.